All right. Hey, everyone. My name's Alex. I am an integrations engineer at UMA.
For the past few years, I've had the privilege of working with a bunch of integrations, prediction markets, insurance protocols, and recently with DAOs, helping them with optimistic governance. Really, the focus today, I'm going to talk about using oSnap to decentralize your DAO, but I really just want to make sure that everyone understands kind of how UMA works and how you can use it in your project this weekend. So what does UMA actually do? UMA is an optimistic oracle that records truths about the world onto blockchains. So what does that mean? You can pretty much make any statement. You can use which team won out of team A or team B. You can say, is this a valid snapshot proposal? And then essentially you can propose a transaction and attach a bond to that transaction that essentially enters into a challenge window. And during that challenge window, if anyone disputes, it's escalated to the token holders to resolve. And if nobody disputes, at the end of that challenge period, it is deemed as valid and can be used in your smart contracts. So like I said, if the statements are false, well, UMA's oracle assumes a statement is true, but allows anyone to dispute if it's incorrect during that challenge window. Disputes are really rare. We've seen maybe one dispute out of every few hundred markets, and that's because disputes are financially incentivized. So when you're posting or when you're making an assertion, you have to post a bond. And if you're wrong, when someone challenges that, you lose your bond. So it's very costly to make inaccurate or bad data in your assertion. And that's because UMA's resolution process is essentially the token holders vote when there are disputes. It's a two-phase process. That first phase is the commit process. And during that commit phase, no token holders can actually see other people's votes. And they vote based on their belief. And then in the second phase, each are 24 hours, people reveal their votes. And at the end, the majority of the votes are essentially used to resolve that market. So now I just kind of want to talk through briefly some of the current integrations that we have, and it might help to kind of click on what kind of assertions we're seeing every day. This is one that I just pulled from Polymarket. It's a prediction market, and it's basically asking if Oppenheimer grossed over $50 million domestically on its opening weekend. And I think that this is a good example because Polymarket could have stopped there, and that's all they asked, and they probably would have gotten the right answer. But when you're making statements to UMA, I think it's really important to include a data source and really think it through any edge cases. So if you go to this box office mojo and there are estimates, and that could cause some confusion when people go to resolve this or make an assertion that this is resolved. And in doing that, so Polymarket predicts, they actually specify use the final, not estimates. Even though it seems obvious, it can cause confusion and cause disputes. And another example is we have Cozy and Sherlock. They're both prediction markets. And this is just basically, was there a hack, bug, user error, malfeasance? And again, it's basically just asking if 50% of the user funds in Curve was hacked before or after a specific block number on Ethereum. And again, I think these details that they're providing a specific block and a specific value of 50% or more. So there's not going to be any confusion in terms of if there's a small bug in the UI or something like that causes a couple $1,000s, that's not disputable, or that's not something that you can actually claim as a hack. It has to be 50% of those user funds. So I think that's an important distinction when you're kind of thinking about what you should be asserting to the oracle. And here are some other examples of our integrations. Across is our Crosstown Bridge. And basically how it works is it would be really capital inefficient to make a proposal every single time someone went from one chain to the next. So all of the transactions are bundled in basically a few hour period, and that's what's proposed to the chain. Another example is decentralized, and essentially asks, it's essentially verifying addresses on a list. So it could verify blacklisted wallets or wallets involved in a hack. I think one of their first lists asking like what addresses, what UMA addresses voted correctly 80% of the time. So you can kind of think of how you can use this to use UMA to verify, these address lists. And then the last one is Polymarket is just asking TVL at a certain date. But I think it's kind of cool to see like these three different use cases. I mean, one is a very bot-driven Crosstown Bridge. One is a manually proposing addresses to a list. And then this pull together one for TVL is just using DeFi Llama's API. So it really shows just like how flexible all this can be when you're using data with UMA. And I guess like, how does all these apply to governance? I mean, this is the typical governance flow. And there's onchain, there's, forking Compound's governance contract. But this is what we're kind of seeing in a typical governance flow. You first have forum discussion, and that's basically a period where anyone can propose an idea. And typically DAO stewards or the community come in and make comments and make sure that the proposal is aligned with the actual DAO, like what the DAO actually wants to do. And then when everyone kind of gives it the green light, it usually goes to a snapshot vote. And Snapshot is actually really good in a lot of ways, even though it is off-chain. It gives a lot of control, such as the quorum, the voting period. You have a lot of flexibility with like your voting strategies. And like, if there's LP tokens, giving them voting power on chain would be really difficult. But with Snapshot, it's no problem. You can just add it as an ERC20 balance strategy. So there are some advantages of using Snapshot. The problem is the multisig implementation. You're essentially just signaling on Snapshot, and the votes aren't really binding. So what we really wanted to create with oSnap is a way to enforce the votes of Snapshot. And that's what we're really pushing, is reducing the reliance on the multisigs, because DAO coordination efforts just don't mean anything if it's just signaling support and it has no actual execution on chain. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these multisig problems. I think, the first one, multisig signers can act against the will of their community. For the most part, the DAO and the community and the multisig is usually aligned. However, if you're asking the multisig to remove themselves as a signer or pay themselves less, that could be delayed or not executed at all. The other issue is just, the regulation. DAOs are not resilient at all if you're essentially relying on a few individuals that you can go into a Discord and find these people. They oftentimes have ENS names attached to their wallets or their KYC. So I mean, it's like how decentralized and resilient is a DAO if all you have to do is go after the multisig signers as regulators. So they really are a target. And the last thing is just the burden of signing multisig transactions. It's not fun. Like, I always ask kind of what's the process of multisig signers how they review transactions. And they kind of laugh at me because I don't think the review process is there's a lot of trust involved, and they typically just trust whoever is asking them to sign that transaction. And the problem with that is the community depends on these signers to always be accurate. I mean, it only takes one transaction signed wrong with the multisig for essentially the DAO to go down. So that's really why we created oSnap. It allows the DAO to be the multisig. So now anybody can initiate a transaction, and that can be proposed. So by the community, it can be proposed by the multisig, either multisig holders, or it can be proposed by anyone that's not even involved in the DAO. And that's powerful because you're essentially not only allowing anyone to initiate a transaction, you're also allowing anyone to dispute. And this works the same way as Polymarket did with the prediction market, or Cozy did with the insurance. And the truth is economically incentivized because you're posting a bond when you initiate these transactions. And the challenge windows can be 2 or 3 days. And so if you have to post 10 WETH and someone comes in and disputes you, you're essentially losing that 10 WETH. So it's very costly, and people are very careful when they're proposing these transactions. And I think the most underrated feature of this is transactions are transparent when voting. So they're actually included in the Snapshot proposal. And I think that's a huge step forward. You can actually look at the transactions when you're voting on Snapshot, and it's just so much more transparent. So if something is wrong with the transaction payloads, you're noticing it while you're voting, and you're not waiting essentially for that multisig signers to then execute those transactions. So this is just a quick overview of the flow. You have your safe deploy the oSnap module. You can then set some custom parameters or keep the default. And then the rest of the flow is pretty much the same, all the way through creating a snapshot proposal, except you have a transaction builder at the last step where you're able to input transaction payloads. And if the snapshot proposal passes, you can then propose and execute those transactions. And if someone does dispute, it goes to the token holders to vote on. I think an important distinction, though, is that the resolution value that the token holders are resolving is not actually executed by the safe. So they have no control of like the transaction payloads that are being executed. So if there's a dispute, that actual proposal is deleted, and then it needs to be re-proposed. So UMA token holders actually have no control over what's being executed or not. And these are so I kind of looked at like the rules of, the assertion of prediction markets and insurance. And this is kind of what's proposed for oSnap, where you're really validating if the proposal was approved on Snapshot, the Snapshot space. You're looking at the quorum and the voting period, which are actually, these are just example values, but these are what are usually set by the team in Snapshot. And to basically confirm that Snapshot voting system is not being exploited or otherwise unavailable. So it's a very straightforward validation process, and you can kind of see what these transactions look like in Snapshot. And I created a proposal before this, and it's basically asking, is this transaction proposed during the ETH Global demo? So this voting period has already been completed, so I can just go in here and actually just request this. And when I'm requesting, it alerts me what is the required bond to post. I made it 0 because this is on testnet, and the challenge period is 2 minutes. And in production, this is 2 or 3 days with a bond of typically $5,000 to $10,000. So yeah, I signed that, and you can kind of see it'll alert you when these transactions are able to be executed. We won't wait the 2 minutes, but after this period is over, you'll then be able to go through the same process to actually execute the transactions, which will send this ETH to this address. So we have some bounties. We'd love for everyone to build as much as they can on UMA using pretty much any use case that makes sense to you. Our first place is $5,000. Our second place is $2,000, and then we have a pool prize for anyone that uses UMA for $3,000. And also, we're always hiring. So if you are someone that's interested in working with us, or know anyone that is interested, come to our booth, or feel free to go to this link, or just come find us. You're not going to remember this link. All right, thank you. And any questions? That was the snapshot space. So essentially, the safe, how you would deploy the safe. You would deploy the oSnap module with that safe, and then you could go into the snapshot settings and add the oSnap module into that space. And in the rules of the oSnap space, you'd want to include that space that you're governing over. So, so like you would have. So when you went into Gnosis and the Zodiac module, you would specify that outcome finance space, and then you would add it to the space in Snapshot. It's typically the team. So yeah, so you'd have like most DAOs that we talk to, they have core members of the team that are the signers. And so what this would allow anyone to actually propose the transactions. And it can still be the core members. I think we've probably seen that several times. But what it still does is allows it to be a much more transparent process. And I think the big win is like those transactions are in that snapshot space. They're transparent what's actually being signed. And yeah, if they're signing something that is not actually valid, it can be disputed. Yeah, you can build anything using the UMA's Oracle, or you could also use a Crosstown Bridge. So if you have any type of cross-chain use cases, you could absolutely use a cross for that. I think that like it's really open-ended. So if you have any type of data off-chain calculations or anything like that that you want to use in your contracts, I think UMA is a great use case. And yeah, it's very open-ended in terms of like what you want to build. Do you have any questions? Yeah, that's a good question. So really, it would only be malicious if it didn't follow these rules. So if there was a snapshot vote, but the quorum didn't actually, of the vote didn't actually meet the minimum of the rules, or if the voting period set in that proposal wasn't long enough, like that was specified on the oSnap module. So the other would be like, yeah, if someone proposed transactions that didn't actually pass. So if you go into I think it'll help to see kind of, well, actually this might be difficult. Like if you go into the oSnap module, you'll see the rules specified in that module that like essentially govern over that space. So yeah, and you can change these rules and these parameters. But yeah, this is what really is holding those snapshot proposals as valid or invalid. Any other questions? All right. Thanks for coming.